Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengausen. Today is October 17th, and this episode is going to be very eventful. In this episode, Trump announced a breakthrough in negotiations on Ukraine after a conversation with Putin, and he's already preparing to meet with him in Budapest. And today at 8 o'clock p.m. Kyiv time, Volodymyr Zelenskyy will meet with Donald Trump to discuss Tomahawks and sanctions. We'll see if Putin managed to derail things and deceive him once again. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones are setting fire to Crimean oil depots and substations. Hvardeyskoye and Feodosia are burning. So basically, the blackout schedule is already getting close to Crimea. The submarine Novorossiysk is belching smoke and crawling through the Baltic under NATO's mockery. Meanwhile, Putin's advisor Dmitriev is playing to his ego. The Putin-Trump tunnel is like an expensive lure for Donald Trump. And Elon Musk is calling for 100,000 colonists to go to Mars. At a minimum. All this and more in today's episode. There will be a lot of interesting things, so if you're new to the channel, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. Donald Trump announced a meeting with Putin in Budapest and called their phone conversation very productive. Quoting, "President Putin congratulated me and the United States on the great achievement of peace in the Middle East. According to him, this is something people have dreamed of for centuries. I sincerely believe that success in the Middle East will help us in negotiations to end the war between Russia and Ukraine." President Putin also thanked First Lady Melania. And after the conversation ended, we agreed that next Sunday there will be a meeting of our advisors at the highest level. The initial meeting will be between Marco Rubio, and we will announce the others a bit later. And then Putin and I will meet in Budapest to see if we can put an end to this inglorious war between Russia and Ukraine. And with President Zelenskyy, we will meet in the Oval Office where we will discuss this conversation with Putin and much more. "I think today's phone call made great progress," said Donald Trump. Again, great progress. I'm having a bit of déjà vu. Putin likes to launch a massive shelling of Ukraine after such conversations. For some reason, he has this habit to show what great progress has been made. And again, everything is very good, everything is very productive. This way, Putin could drag things out until the end of Donald Trump's term, stringing him along with empty promises. Well, this is classic Russian stalling tactics. As soon as the issue of sanctions was raised, the Russians immediately agreed to negotiations in Turkey. Remember? Medinsky came there with his team and there was zero result. Not only that, they even threatened there, saying, "If you don't give up 4 regions, we'll take 6. Now that's what they call big progress. When Trump's ultimatum was about to expire, the Russians once again quickly sent one of their envoys to Alaska. Zero results. Every time they announce major progress. And let me remind you, Putin always managed to get what he wanted each time. Sanctions weren't imposed, but Donald Trump did achieve his goal. When he asked Putin for a temporary ceasefire, what did Putin do? Nothing at all. In other words, Putin is achieving his goal. He wants to prevent sanctions against those who buy Russian energy resources. What did I get? Tomahawks for Ukraine. Putin gets what he wants, and what does Donald Trump achieve? Yet another very nice, productive, warm, and pleasant meeting. So right now, Putin just wants the sanctions to be delayed as long as possible. That's all. And of course, the whole Tomahawk thing is just so everyone forgets about it. But as for Putin himself, what does he want? Right now, he's using this period between now and Budapest and after Budapest to keep striking at Ukraine's energy infrastructure again and again. His goal is to bring the state of the energy sector in certain regions of Ukraine to such a blackout state so that just 1 or 2 more strikes and that's it. People will freeze, they'll be left without power. That's what he wants. He needs more time to achieve this. Do you know what's going to happen in Hungary? Believe me, they'll come out and say, "We had a very good discussion here, now we're assembling working groups again." They'll be given tasks and they'll discuss everything and then they'll meet again and sort things out and so on. In other words, Putin needs to buy time. That's why, by the way, I just can't understand why Donald Trump, who probably considers himself the best negotiator of all time, always makes concessions to a paper rat. Putin-Trump does not make concessions to. After all, not imposing sanctions is a concession. Every time Donald Trump makes this concession. Well, at the very least, deadlines and ultimatums should be enforced. So if Putin wants peace, as he says, Donald Trump, I don't know what he told him this time, maybe he just flattered him. Judging by the way the sentence started, Putin, the great truce, we've waited centuries for it. He praised me so much, I'm just amazing. Good for him. But the thing is, Putin understands. He has excellent profilers working for him, unfortunately, who know exactly which buttons to press. How do you talk to Putin? It's actually very simple. Do you want peace, Putin? No problem. Then let's say by October 31st, or on October 31st, the attacks on Ukrainian cities stop. Well, the so-called air truce. That is, the situation at the front may change, but you, Putin, stop hitting Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure with missiles and drones. So let's say at the end of the month, if you don't stop, well, you do want peace, right? If you don't stop, then Ukraine gets sold through NATO 50 Tomahawk missiles, for example. And a 30% tariff is imposed on those who buy Russian oil. If after another month, well, you do want peace, Putin, right? If after another month you still don't implement an air truce, at the very least an air truce, then Ukraine is sold 300 missiles through NATO, 100% tariffs are imposed, and so on and so forth. Believe me, such a clearly visualized, concrete escalation ladder for forcing peace, with these understandable steps where everything is spelled out for each month and everything is enforced exactly on schedule, that's when those who buy his energy resources will start putting serious pressure on Putin very quickly. And you and I know they are capable of applying pressure there. And the pterodactyl of peace, Orban, is already rubbing his webbed wings in anticipation. Hungary is already preparing a meeting between Trump and Putin. According to Orban, Hungary has begun preparations for this meeting. Well, today Orban will have a phone call with Putin. The meeting will be about peace. Look, the territory where Trump and Putin will meet is hostile. The host side is hostile to Ukraine. I'm talking about Orban here, who is doing everything he can to harm Ukraine, blocking anti-Russian sanctions, blocking aid to Ukraine, holding referendums, or rather surveys, to ensure that Ukraine never joins the European Union. In short, it's hostile territory with a hostile leader. Another thing is, of course, he will fully play along with the one he has been dependent on for many, many years, Putin. So, Trump is fine. Orban also has a very good and strong relationship with Trump. Trump has praised him quite recently and publicly, but he's deeply hooked on Russian oil. So Orban stated that at this important meeting, they will indeed talk about peace, which will certainly open a brand new and significant phase of economic development in Hungary and across Europe. Everyone talks about their own thing and the mangy one about the bathhouse. In other words, for Orban, the main thing is, God forbid, that the supply of Russian oil and gas to Hungary doesn't stop. His regime has depended on this for 14 years. You know, I'm curious. If Trump and Putin were to appear before Orban at the same time, who would he kiss on the ass first? That's a tricky question. And another interesting thing is how Putin is going to fly there, over which countries. That's a very good question. And Trump also dampened Ukraine's expectations regarding the supply of long-range Tomahawk missiles. In other words, the US cannot deplete its own stockpiles, Trump said. In a phone conversation with Putin, he discussed the possibility of supplying them, and this is how he communicated it. He says, I told Putin, how would you feel if I supplied a couple thousand Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine? To which Putin replied that he didn't like that idea. Seriously? He doesn't like it? And after the conversation with Putin, Trump also said that now is not the ideal time to impose sanctions. So it turns out that both the Tomahawks and the sanctions are being postponed at least until Budapest. Budapest will be in about 2 weeks, maybe a little earlier. So Putin will have 2 weeks to strike at the energy infrastructure about it not being the ideal time for sanctions. In my opinion, right now is the perfect time for sanctions. In fact, that time came long ago, even before this. Trump himself says every time that Putin's economy is in a dire state. Isn't this the perfect moment, when Putin's economy is already cracking, when entire sectors are collapsing, coal and construction is next in line? The budget deficit will soon reach 10 trillion when there's not enough money here or there. Isn't this the ideal time to strike? Well, and I've already talked about this many, many times. Every time Donald Trump adds that 1,000 people die every day in this war. And he keeps continually giving Putin even more and more time. By the way, here's another interesting question. By the way, just yesterday, Donald Trump made a very emotional appeal to Putin. Stop killing Ukrainians and Russians. Stop the killing. What has changed? And Trump, who, let me remind you, doesn't want to impose sanctions until Europe stops buying Russian oil and gas. And now, taking the opportunity, since he's going to see Orban, he'll ask him this question. When are you going to stop buying? After all, the whole trio will be there. When are you going to stop buying gas and oil from Putin? Or is that something different? Or does Orban have a special status? Well, I think you and I both know the answer to that question. And the reason sanctions aren't being imposed is absolutely not because Europe continues to buy, and even then, in much smaller volumes. I think Orban is now shining like a freshly polished samovar. Trump is on his way. You know, like that kid in the yard who walks around and threatens everyone, saying his brother will come back from the army. Now Trump is flying in and will show you all how it's done here in Brussels. But for now, Schrödinger's Tomahawks, which may or may not exist, have been put on the back burner, and the front is being held by Ukrainian heroes who have completely thwarted Putin's offensive. And let me remind you, right now we have an important fundraiser for the 101st Separate Brigade. We've almost reached our goal, just a little bit left. This fundraiser is for ground-based unmanned evacuation vehicles for the wounded called Termite. These unmanned vehicles help save not only the lives of our defenders, but also medics who no longer have to go out under fire to retrieve the wounded. The unmanned evacuator does it instead. This is absolutely vital equipment on the front lines right now, and our defenders from the 101st Brigade have reached out to us, the viewers of this channel, asking for help with this fundraiser. Please take a look.
Ми, бійці 101-ї бригади охорони, звертаємось до Бориса Тізенгаузена та його підписникам за допомогою. Ми дуже вдячні вам за раніше надані дрони. На сьогодні нам дуже потрібні 2 наземні роботизовані комплекси «Терміт» для швидкої і своєчасної евакуації поранених з поля бою, що у теперішній ситуації дозволить врятувати їх життя. Наші підрозділи воюють на Константинівському напрямку та Часовому Ярі. Продовжуємо нищити ворога і віримо в вашу допомогу. Слава Україні!
We have just a little left to collect, less than 10%. There are many of us here, and together we are a great force. Our heroes are defending Ukraine, but they need our help as well. Your donation today could save someone's life. That's why I'm asking you to support this fundraiser. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There you'll find private, mono, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. I see all of you, and I want to say this to each of you. A huge thank you for your contribution to Ukraine's victory. An enormous thank you from myself and from our soldiers. But if for some reason you can't see the payment details, here is a QR code. It leads to the fundraiser. And as for the Russian submarine Novorossiysk, which NATO's Secretary General constantly mocks, it only made it as far as the Baltic Sea. So this relatively new submarine is crawling along at 10 kilometers per hour on the surface, unable to submerge. It's coming from the Mediterranean Sea, but from time to time it emits plumes of light smoke, and according to experts, it apparently can't dive anymore. Initially, there was information about problems with its fuel system. NATO has been monitoring this submarine since September 26th. It passed Gibraltar and is now chugging along, first accompanied by a French and now a British warship. In general, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is constantly laughing at it, and he recently stated that the Russian Mediterranean group used to include surface ships, submarines, and supply vessels. Now, essentially, Russia has almost no naval presence left in the Mediterranean Sea. A lonely and broken Russian submarine limping along is returning home after its patrol. How different this is from Tom Clancy's 1984 novel, The Hunt for Red October. Today it's more like a hunt for the nearest mechanic. Well, that's how he chuckles about it. So let's put it this way. Who should we thank for the fact that Russia now has fewer submarines and far fewer ships? And who destroyed a submarine of exactly the same project called Rostov-on-Don, who destroyed it in the dry dock in Crimea? Who sank 30% of the Black Sea Fleet along with its flagship, the cruiser Moskva? Who forced the Black Sea Fleet to flee from its main base in occupied Crimea? That's right, the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine, this will go down in history. Ukraine, which doesn't even have its own navy, has wiped out a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet, which is now hiding under the floorboards in Novorossiysk or somewhere else. In general, things never really worked out for Putin with the navy from the very start. As soon as he came to power, there was the incident with the Kursk submarine. The whole world was shocked by that idiotic smirk and the phrase, "it sank." An even more telling story is that of the only heavy aircraft-carrying cruiser, the Admiral Kuznetsov, which used to be called the Leonid Brezhnev. It could have been the only aircraft-carrying cruiser, and this summer, the chairman of the board and head of VTB Kostin announced in Russia that the only Russian aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, would be decommissioned. That's it. So that's it, by the way. It was the flagship of the Russian Federation's navy and the only aircraft-carrying ship designed for 28 planes and 24 helicopters. But you know what's interesting? Actually, the story of this flagship of the Russian Navy since 1917, it has been... The repairs were estimated at 20 billion rubles. It went in for repairs after a mission to the shores of Syria where it lost two carrier-based fighters, a Su-33 and a MiG-29KR. The pilots ejected, but in the end, that's -2 aircraft. And this wasn't even during combat, they were just trying to land on it. And in 2018, a year after it was put in for repairs, the floating dock where the ship was being repaired sank. 2 people died at that time, and a 5 by 5 meter hole was made in the ship's hull when a crane fell. Since this was the only floating dock capable of repairing a ship of that size, that was it, the repairs came to a halt. In 2019, there was a fire on board. Again, 2 people died. The damage amounted to 500 million rubles. And in 2022, there was another fire during repairs. So that's it.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Now even Russian officials admit that it's cheaper to scrap it for metal. That's the whole story. That's what it's all about. Russia is a symbol of the Putin era. In words, greatness, invincibility, the most advanced weapons, we have missiles that can fly endlessly around the globe. The whole world fears us. But in reality, billions are written off on outdated technology, carelessness, theft, endless delays in commissioning, and in the end, everything just gets scrapped. Putin's Russia is one big Potemkin village. But as it turns out, even the facades of these Potemkin villages are enough to scare Europe. And now let's move on to the sanctions from the armed forces of Ukraine. It seems the AFU have decided to leave Russia's southern group without fuel. That is, last night another oil depot was attacked in occupied Crimea in the settlement of Hvardeyskoye. I've been to that settlement. I'm from Crimea, let me remind you, I was born there. At the moment, that oil depot is burning quite brightly. The smoke can be seen from several dozen kilometers away. And let me remind you, just a few days ago, the largest oil depot in Feodosia was attacked again. Even the oil terminal was hit. In short, that depot keeps burning, and this one has just caught fire. And apparently this time in Feodosia, nothing will be left of the tanks, but that's not all. Here, the armed forces of Ukraine, the GUR, the SBU, and Magyar have basically handed the Russians a whole package of sanctions. In this same Hvardeyskoye, there was a strike not only on the oil depot, but also on the military airfield, and even on the Russian garrison stationed there. But that's still not all. So in Crimea, at night several electrical substations were put out of commission, including the main substation in Zhankoi, or Zhankong as we used to call it in Crimea. So now rolling blackouts are being introduced, and here, once again, Putin is being shown in very concrete terms that if he continues to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the occupiers in Crimea will be left without electricity and fuel. Well, apparently Putin doesn't care about the occupiers in Crimea, just like he doesn't care about the rest of his population. But that's still not all. The cherry on top. During a nighttime attack by Ukrainian drones, Russian forces shot down their own Su-30 SM aircraft. This happened right in the area of the Hvardeyskoye airfield. So there's a lot of news coming out of Hvardeyskoye today. Well, since I was born in Crimea and still have acquaintances there, I continue to keep in touch only with the reasonable ones. I completely stopped communicating with the unreasonable ones after the full-scale invasion, because it's just impossible. I don't have the magic to punch someone through a phone screen, though I want to every time. Back at the very beginning, when the Russian missiles started flying, for a couple of months these people tried to convince us. The fans of the Russian world would say that we were bombing ourselves, that nothing was clear yet. Maybe we were launching the missiles ourselves. Then, when Putin started croaking about launching this operation and so on, they said, "No, just wait, they'll come and save you." I said, we don't need to be saved. You can't even save yourselves. You live in swamps without roads, without gas, with outhouses in the streets. Save yourselves first, then you can offer to save others. And in general, you offer help first, not just show up to save someone. That's basically how all Russians are. Well, not all, but those who support Putin. Because there are Russians, let me remind you, and I know some of them from the Freedom of Russia Legion and from the RDK. Russians who are fighting for Ukraine. And I had the chance to work with both groups, and it was really, really cool and just spot on. And recently, an acquaintance of mine wrote to me that there was a family living in his building who were especially happy about the arrival of the Russians. Well, they've already fled from occupied Crimea. It's too loud for them, they don't like it, there are constant strikes and the sirens are always going off, and now the power is about to be cut off too. You see, anything can happen. Now, let's talk about which snakes in suits are playing on the side of the Russian Federation. I'm about to tell you about the Putin-Trump tunnel, but first I want to say, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Don't forget, hit the bell. The more reasonable people we have, the fewer unreasonable ones there are. That's the logic, after all. Plus, we're promoting the Ukrainian position, which is important. So subscribe and hit the bell. So, this very cunning Dmitriev, Putin's advisor and head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, approached Elon Musk with the idea of building a tunnel from Russia to Alaska under the Bering Strait. And he wrote, "Imagine connecting the USA and Russia with a Putin-Trump tunnel." And according to Dmitriev, says that using Elon Musk's company's technology, the construction could be completed for less than 8 billion, basically peanuts, in less than 8 years. Give Russia 8 billion, and in 8 years they'll tell you they need another 8 years. In general, this would become a symbol of cooperation between Eurasia and America, and to this post, Dmitriev attached some Soviet-era document where it was written that a bridge, a Kennedy-Khrushchev bridge, should be built between Alaska and so on. So Dmitriev showed this plan, but what I'm curious about is, if Canada refuses to allow passage through its territory, then what would be the point of this tunnel between Russia and Alaska? Tell me. And this Dmitriev, he's one of the craftiest and smartest of Putin's negotiators. I mean, this isn't the first time he's tried to do something like this in a veiled way, to latch on to Elon Musk, to get involved in some joint project, ideally to grease each other's palms with money. Sometimes he offers money for the colonization of Mars, and now he's pitching to Elon Musk's companies to build this tunnel. And I think Donald Trump might really like this project, by the way, because he always wanted to leave behind some significant object, something you could actually touch, like the wall on the border, for example. With Mexico, yes, the Trump wall. And look at what subtle strings this Dmitriev is playing on. A narcissistic type, especially in politics, almost always wants to leave behind something tangible, something monumental, bearing their own name. You know, this is an element of what's called the architecture of immortality. In other words, it's a way to cement oneself in concrete, in steel, I don't know, in glass, so that even after death, their name is spoken daily by millions of people. Well, Trump, for example, built the Trump Golf Club, Trump Towers, Trump Plaza. In other words, he names everything after himself. And it's a bit upsetting, because it's one thing when you build something yourself and name it after yourself, but it's another when there's a national airport named after Ronald Reagan, or the Hoover Dam, or the John F. Kennedy Space Center. You know, you want something like that. Imagine the Trump tunnel for Putin. Now that's an idea he would definitely like. If you can't rule forever, at least build something that will outlast everyone. That's how they think. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's very easy to slip into megalomania here. It's very easy to be influenced in that direction, which, by the way, many dictators have had megalomania. By the way, Napoleon built the Arc de Triomphe, and Saddam Hussein was restoring Babylon. That, by the way, is a truly cosmic story. He actually considered himself a descendant of the Babylonian kings. And when he found out that Nebuchadnezzar the King used to leave his name and title stamped on the bricks of ancient Babylon as an imprint with his name and title, Hussein demanded that this practice be repeated. And so, on the walls of Babylon, which he was restoring, just so you understand, it was a reconstruction. That is, part of Babylon there is basically like some kind of amusement park made of modern bricks. What kind of Babylon is that, really? And they wrote on the walls that Saddam Hussein built over the old foundation during his rule. The victorious Saddam Hussein, President of the Republic, guardian of great Iraq, initiator of its rebirth and builder of its great civilization, may God protect him, restored Great Babylon in 1987. The Kukushechka ensemble left for good. So now this partially restored Babylon looks somewhat like an abandoned amusement park. By the way, Putin did something similar in Crimea, my native Crimea. He built some kind of ugly modern replica on the site of ancient Chersonesus, using all this contemporary stuff. He probably thinks he restored Chersonesus Historica too, just like Saddam Hussein did with Babylon. I remember it well. My grandmother and grandfather lived nearby, and as kids, we used to go to the sea right through Chersonesus Historica. And I clearly remember that in the warm season they used to put on theatrical performances of the time right on the ruins of the ancient theater. So it was really something, especially in the evenings when everything was lit up. It felt magical. But really, what is there to talk about? Just look at the interiors of Putin's palace in Gelendzhik with that tacky style, the aqua disco and so on. By the way, about Elon Musk. Elon Musk has stated that for a successful colonization of Mars, at least 100,000 volunteers are needed. According to him, to achieve good results, it's not enough to just send people to Mars once. You have to ensure they can live and develop there autonomously. In addition, at least 1 million tons of useful cargo will have to be sent from Earth. And it needs to be arranged so that the Mars community can continue to grow, even if, for some reason, supply ships from Earth stop arriving, Elon Musk stated. It was at this point that I became really interested, and I had an idea to gather all the dictators along with their families and close associates. I think there would even be more than 100,000 people. Putin with his Kabayeva and the Kabayevs, Kim Jong-un, Lukashenko with his son Kolya and his other sons. Send them all there, to Mars, let them colonize it. And if by chance the supply ships from Earth stop arriving, well, anything can happen. And you friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and let's help our soldiers from the 101st Brigade. There's just a little bit left to go. The donation details are in the description to this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.